Have you ever witnessed a scene so unjust it made your heart pound? That moment when someone powerful, arrogant, and without limits decides to take out their frustration on the wrong person. If you've experienced something like that, you know exactly the mix of indignation and helplessness that arises. And if you've never been through it, stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Imagine the bustling atmosphere of a large airport, announcements echoing through the loudspeakers, children crying, suitcases rolling from one side to the other, endless queues, and exhausted passengers after hours of waiting. This is the setting where it all begins, and where a story of humiliation and poetic justice is about to explode before everyone's eyes. In the middle of the line, a billionaire known for his authoritarian demeanor completely loses his temper. He doesn't speak, he shouts. He points his finger, rages, and demands priority, as if the world were obligated to stop to cater to his whims. His voice cuts through the air like a blade, making even those who have nothing to do with the problem shrink inwardly. But the real tension arises when he unleashes all his fury on a black woman who apparently is only there trying to resolve the problem of her lost luggage. She doesn't respond aggressively. She doesn't raise her voice. She simply observes him with a disconcerting calm, as if she knew something that no one else knew. And it is precisely there that everything begins to change. While he humiliates her in front of everyone, saying that incompetent people shouldn't work for an airline, the entire room seems to hold its breath. Passengers exchange uncomfortable glances. Some are indignant, others frightened, and others simply try to pretend they don't see, but it's impossible to ignore the weight of that scene. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever seen someone treated as if they were worth less, simply because of their appearance, skin color, or social standing? It's painful, it's revolting, and it's precisely this kind of injustice that makes us wish, deep down, for a turnaround, capable of putting everything back in its place. The woman, firm, continues holding her documents, maintaining her posture. Her hands tremble slightly, but not from fear, rather from control. It's as if she's measuring every reaction, every breath, every word she's about to say. There's a silent strength there, something that contrasts completely with the desperate shout of the man trying to reaffirm an empty power, a power that depends on shouting to exist. And with each passing second, curiosity grows on the faces around her. Who is this woman? Why isn't she intimidated? Why doesn't she fight back? Why does she seem to observe everything with an almost disconcerting serenity? The billionaire, oblivious to the magnitude of what he's doing, continues his verbal abuse, repeating insults that make it clear he's accustomed to treating people as tools, not human beings. And the more he speaks, the more evident the contrast becomes. On one side, an inflated ego, abuse of power, aggressive arrogance. On the other, dignity, self-control. The strength of someone who knows they don't need to raise their voice to be respected. But nobody there imagined who she really was. And that silent phrase seems to pierce the air at that moment. You sense that something big is about to happen, something that will turn that scene upside down. And as the atmosphere heats up, as the billionaire tries to assert himself and the woman remains irreducibly calm, a truth begins to take shape. A truth that will transform that airport into the stage for one of the greatest social upheavals anyone there has ever witnessed. And it is precisely here, in this instant when everything seems about to overflow, that our story truly begins. As tensions rose in the crowded lobby, something curious was happening among the onlookers. Some looked on indignantly. Others lowered their heads as if ashamed of the billionaire's behavior, and there were also those who gazed at the woman with a mixture of respect and bewilderment, as if realizing they were facing someone far greater than they appeared. And perhaps you, watching now, have also felt this same anguish at seeing someone belittled for no reason. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you most so far. Your voice matters, And I really want to know how this story is affecting you. Although it may seem like just an isolated scene, moments like this say a lot about how we treat each other, especially in situations of stress and inequality. That's why, when you comment, when you share your experience or your opinion, you not only participate in the conversation, you help create a community that recognizes, supports, and strengthens each other. And that makes all the difference. Just like leaving a like right now helps this video reach more people who also need to hear stories like this. Stories that remind us that dignity and respect are worth much more than power and wealth. And if you feel that this type of content inspires you, provokes reflection, or simply makes you see the world in a different way, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach even more people with messages that matter, and that, in a way, rescue us a little from the daily chaos. It is thanks to you that this work continues, that new stories are told, and that each video finds someone who needed to hear exactly that at that moment. And while all this echoed silently in the hearts of the surrounding passengers, the billionaire still had no idea who he had chosen as the target of that humiliation. He continued speaking loudly, demanding things, certain that his authority would be enough to bend anyone in front of him. But the woman remained there, motionless, with that firm gaze that seemed to pierce his words like wind. Something was about to happen, something that would completely change the course of that discussion, and the curious faces around were already beginning to sense that this confrontation would not end the way the billionaire imagined. The billionaire continued speaking loudly, as if each of his words were a decree the world was obligated to obey. He was the kind of man accustomed to crossing borders without waiting in line, entering rooms where only select guests could enter, resolving everything with a phone call, and above all, the kind of person who deeply believed that money was the master key to any door. From afar, one saw only a well-dressed man, with an expensive watch gleaming under the cold airport lights, but those who observed closely perceived something deeper. An inflated ego that needed constant feeding, a mentality built around the idea that respect can be bought. He didn't talk to his wife. He spoke above her as if she were merely an obstacle between him and the next important appointment on his busy schedule. But while he was exploding inside, she seemed to be on a different rhythm, a different frequency, a different truth. There was something about that woman's posture that made people look twice. Nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated. It was the elegance of someone with impeccable manners, someone who had learned throughout her own journey that dignity is a silent armor. The way she held the documents, how she tilted her head to really hear what he was saying, even if it was insults, and the almost disconcerting calm with which she breathed. Everything about her conveyed a presence that didn't need effort to be noticed. It wasn't submission, it wasn't fear. It was something else, something deeper, as if she were evaluating every detail, every gesture, every word that came out of the mouth of that man who, without realizing it, was sinking deeper with each passing minute. She didn't fight back. She didn't raise her voice, but her eyes said otherwise. And this, without anyone commenting, began to change the energy around them. It was as if those eyes carried a hidden truth, a backstage secret that had not yet been revealed, a kind of invisible authority that no one could name, but everyone felt. The billionaire kept insisting, complaining about the weather, the incompetence, the service, the airline's policies, as if everything were against him. The most curious thing is that his impatience seemed to have started long before that line. Maybe he had woken up irritated. Maybe he was facing problems that no one there knew about. Maybe his life, so full of wealth on the outside, was empty on the inside, and any setback served as a trigger to explode. It's impressive how some people transform small delays into internal wars. For someone with that mentality, anything that goes against their plans becomes a personal affront. Meanwhile, the woman stood there like someone observing a hurricane, without being swept away. She spoke little in the right tone, with carefully chosen words. She asked the employees to remain calm, discreetly thanked them for trying to help, and always returned her gaze to the billionaire with a serenity that generated even more discomfort in him. It was as if she was seeing not only what he was saying, but also what he was trying to hide. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we observe the two side by side, the difference between them is almost symbolic. On one side, a man who believes the world needs to revolve around his immediate needs. On the other, a woman who has learned to navigate hostile environments without losing her center, without losing her own light. This difference creates a huge impact on how each one lives, decides, and reacts. And curiously, it is this difference that will shape the entire upheaval that is about to happen. Her presence wasn't that of someone intimidated. It was that of someone who had studied far more than travel documents, someone who had studied people. Perhaps her life had been marked by challenges greater than a man shouting in an airport. Perhaps she had already faced situations so harsh that she had learned over time to choose her battles. Perhaps she had learned the hard way that not everything that demands a response deserves a response, and that, in itself, is a powerful transformation. The passengers around her sensed it, even without understanding why. They perceived that there was something extraordinary about that woman, an admirable emotional control, a maturity that cannot be bought, an inner strength built brick by brick throughout life. She was the type of person whose demeanor spoke louder than any words, and strange as it seemed, that confrontation which the billionaire believed he was winning was in fact the greatest exposure of his fragility and of her silent strength. And the more he spoke, the clearer this difference became. The aggressive tone of his voice echoed that of someone accustomed to being feared, not respected. She, on the other hand, carried the kind of presence born of authenticity, knowledge, and self-mastery. A presence so subtle and so powerful that some passengers began to wonder who she really was, not because she flaunted anything, but precisely because she didn't need to flaunt anything. It was that feeling that behind the simplicity there was a story full of revelations, important decisions, and achievements that don't appear on the surface. And as the discussion progressed, something inside her began to change. Not her calmness, that remained intact, but the expression in her eyes. It was as if she had finally decided that allowing that behavior had gone too far. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a desire to humiliate in return. It was a kind of internal limit being reached, an exact point where patience meets truth. And whoever noticed this detail felt a shiver, as if something grand was approaching. And when a simple company manager from the back began walking towards them with a desperate look, as if recognizing someone very important mixed in with the crowd, the air seemed to change temperature. Something was about to emerge from behind the scenes of that story, something capable of turning the situation upside down and revealing what had remained hidden until then. And before that turning point happens, leave a comment here so I know you're with me on this reflection. Right, I'm on this journey too. His voice echoed even louder in the lobby, laden with impatience and contempt, as if the whole world were obligated to bow to his whims. Each word was heavy, filled with the mentality of someone who believes that status buys respect, that wealth determines value, that power serves to crush those on the other side of the counter. The woman, however, did not move. While he continued his aggressive behavior, demanding that she do her job properly, as if he were dealing with someone inferior, she simply straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and raised her gaze, not with anger, but with a serenity that no one there could decipher. There was something in that gesture that broke the logic of the conflict, as if a powerful silence were forming in the air, gaining space between his shouts. The passengers around her even stopped pretending not to look. It was impossible to ignore the scene. The injustice was so clear, so uncomfortable, that even those who didn't want to get involved felt the impact. And it's curious how, in moments like that, we realize that true power isn't always in the volume of one's voice, but in how someone chooses to position themselves. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need to defend herself desperately. She didn't need to shout to be heard. There was a hidden truth in the way she remained whole, even in the face of such an obvious storm. When he ordered her to open the company system now, as if he was speaking to an employee obligated to obey him the next minute, the silent audience seemed to hold their breath. It was like watching the behind the scenes of a situation that was completely out of sync with what it should be. With each new order, he tried to reaffirm his own dominance, like someone accustomed to seeing doors open before even touching them. But this time, something wasn't going the way he expected. Perhaps it was her posture. Perhaps it was the fact that, no matter how much he shouted, she didn't back down. Perhaps it was the growing feeling that there was a force there that no one could name. Then, to everyone's surprise, she did the exact opposite of what anyone would have imagined. Without changing her tone of voice, without showing any irritation, without even raising an eyebrow, she asked, "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" The phrase was so unexpected that it pierced the room like a silent shock. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was just a question, but said with such profound calm that it dismantled for a few seconds the structure of arrogance he was trying to maintain. The billionaire gave a mocking laugh, as if trying to regain control after being caught off guard. "Oh, please, just do what I told you. I don't have time for cheap philosophy," he replied, even more arrogantly, as if her question were a personal affront. And perhaps it was, but not in the way he imagined. The tension rose even further. The people around them exchanged glances, trying to understand what was happening. That woman, who until then had seemed like just another passenger, now displayed a presence that no one could ignore, a presence that challenged, without violence, his unfair behavior. Her silence began to carry a different weight, almost like a revelation about to emerge. There was no submission in that silence, nor was there fear. There was something that suggested she was choosing each gesture with millimetric precision as part of a deeply conscious decision. It was a posture that spoke of inner strength, of self-confidence, of a journey marked by experiences that perhaps no one there could imagine. And it is precisely in this kind of contrast that the true transformation of a situation begins to take shape, albeit subtly. He, on the other hand, didn't perceive any of this. He continued throwing out harsh phrases, trying to reaffirm a dominance that was slipping through his fingers without him noticing. With each new outburst, he exposed more fragility than power. With each order given, he revealed more disconnection than authority. It was as if he were trapped in a mindset that couldn't keep up with the hidden truth vibrating there in that brief space between the two of them. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because there's something fascinating about observing how certain people, even in the face of the most blatant injustice, manage to maintain self-control in a way that disarms any attempt at humiliation. The ability not to react impulsively, to choose silence as a tool, to use their gaze as a message. This reveals a strength that doesn't depend on social standing, wealth, or recognition. It's a kind of impact that comes from within, and that often explains why some situations take completely unexpected turns, and that's exactly what began to happen there. With each new aggressive word from him, with each unnecessary display of superiority, she became even more enigmatic. It wasn't indifference, it was awareness. She seemed to see something that he, trapped in his own impatience, couldn't see. Perhaps it was the certainty that his truth would crumble in a short time. Perhaps it was simply the confidence of someone who knows their own worth, even when others try to diminish it. The fact is that that heavy silence said more than any answer could, and everyone around felt it, even without fully understanding. That was the moment when the first signs began to emerge. A more distant employee recognized her face and stood motionless, surprised. A woman in line put her hand to her mouth, as if finally connecting the pieces of a puzzle. Small, discreet gestures, but revealing. It was as if, little by little, her true identity was about to break through the silence and completely transform the course of that conflict. Comment below. This makes sense to me, and we'll continue this story soon. When the manager appeared at the door, almost tripping in his haste, the atmosphere seemed to change dramatically. Even the air seemed to tremble. He searched for the woman with his eyes, and as soon as he found her, his expression shifted to a mixture of relief and profound respect. And then he uttered what no one expected to hear. "Doctor, I apologize for the delay. Madam President, we had an alert in the system, and I came personally to see if everything was all right here." It was like flipping an invisible switch. The noise, the whispers, the billionaires, mockery. It all evaporated in a second. A heavy silence fell, almost elegant, as if those seconds were being observed from the outside, like a decisive chapter in a story that holds the breath of the viewer. The employees, who until seconds before had been tense, straightened their bodies, instinctively aligned themselves, and began to greet her with that respectful nod that cannot be learned, only expressed in the presence of someone. It was pure respect, without exaggeration, without subservience, respect born of genuine recognition. And the billionaire, the one who had just seemed inflated with power, stood completely still. His face lost its color, as if someone had pulled back an invisible cloth and ripped away the mask of arrogance. His eyes, once sharp as razors, now desperately searched for something to focus on, trying to understand what had happened, trying to reorganize his certainties, trying to recalculate his narrative. It was like watching a castle crumble from the inside out, and she, with the same calm she had shown from the very first moment, simply took a deep breath. She didn't smile mockingly. She didn't raise her chin to show off. Nothing like that. Her greatness lay precisely in not needing to prove anything. She looked at the manager, thanked him with a simple gesture, and then turned to the billionaire, who remained paralyzed, as if someone had pressed pause on his life. And then, with that soft voice that cuts deeper than any shout, she said, "I was here like any other passenger. Sometimes it's important to observe what happens when people don't know who you are." The impact of this phrase didn't come from the tone, nor from the hidden authority behind it. It came from the truth, from that hidden truth that lives behind the scenes of human behavior, revealing who we are when we think no one is watching. She then explained, with an almost pedagogical tranquility, that all the employees there had been trained by her to handle difficult situations. And she made a point of adding, without irony, without aggression, almost as an invitation to conscience, difficult situations include disrespectful people. It doesn't matter the position, the money, the influence, or the surname. The billionaire lowered his gaze. The image of that giant, powerful, well-known man bowing before such a simple and profound truth had a force that dispensed with any narrative effort. It was life itself describing how poetic justice works. Silent, elegant, and absolutely just. The woman didn't need to humiliate him. Reality was already doing that on its own. And curiously, without attacking, she taught him, like someone leaving an invisible mark on the heart of someone who needs that shock to reassess their decisions, their mentality, their way of seeing the world. Because sometimes that's how great transformations happen, not by force, but by contrast, by the impact of being confronted with someone who reveals, with simple gestures, how small we can be when we let ego guide our actions. And while everyone watched, there was something in that moment that no one said, but everyone felt. It wasn't about position, money, or hierarchy. It was about humanity, about character, about how we treat those we think don't matter. And that's precisely why the scene had the power to turn the world upside down, because it exposed a universal truth that many people try to ignore. The woman, in turn, maintained the posture of someone who masters her inner workings, someone who doesn't react impulsively because she knows that decisions made calmly have a much greater impact. It was almost impossible not to admire her composure. Even amidst the confusion, even in the face of injustice, even after being disrespected, she remained whole. And this wholeness, this almost inexplicable serenity, was what gave the revelation its strength. The billionaire, not knowing where to put his hands, murmured something inaudible, perhaps a broken apology, perhaps an attempt at justification that would never find space at that moment. But she didn't need to hear it. The lesson had already been given. And then, with the naturalness of someone unmoved by external chaos, she concluded, "We are truly shown by how we treat people when we believe we have power over them." There was no anger, there was no revenge, there was truth. And this truth, spoken simply, made everyone there rethink something within themselves. Every detail, every reaction, every choice we make, in the small moments when we believe no one is watching. And that's precisely why this story resonates so much. Because everyone, in one way or another, has been on both sides. We have judged, we have been judged, we have had to face our own revelations. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happens after this kind of turning point is even more transformative, and it is there that many people discover that true greatness lies, not in position, but in the heart with which we face the most unexpected situations. Before continuing, leave a simple phrase in the comments, just so I know you're with me on this reflection. Write, "I'm on this journey too." The most striking reaction came right after that awkward silence that settles in when someone is unmasked by their own actions. The woman observed the billionaire with a serenity that cannot be bought, trained, or faked. It was a serenity that came from a clear conscience, from the mindset of someone who knows that every gesture, every micro-decision builds the real image we leave in the world. And it was in this dense, almost cinematic atmosphere that she made the decision that would change how everyone there would view that episode from then on. She took a deep breath, took a soft step to the side, as if reorganizing her own internal space before offering a response. And then she looked at the manager, who was still waiting for instructions, tense, trying to guess whether the company president would act harshly, favoritism, exemplary punishment, or some impetuous move. But she didn't choose any of those obvious paths. Her greatness lay precisely in what no one expected. With a firm yet gentle voice, she said, "Prioritize all the passengers who were being served before. Nothing changes for me. I'll wait." This simple phrase struck the room like a soft, precise blow, because she had all the power in her hands to reverse the order, to demand priority, to transform the situation into an elegant revenge. But she didn't. She chose class, she chose conscience, she chose to reveal that true power doesn't need to trample anyone to be perceived. And it was at that moment that the emotional impact became evident. Some employees exchanged discreet glances, as if mentally registering a lesson they will carry for many years. Others swallowed hard, touched by the stance that contradicted everything they were used to seeing in their daily lives, where those with titles or status usually place themselves above others. The billionaire, on the other hand, seemed to shrink, not physically, but emotionally. The arrogance he had displayed minutes before was evaporating like a thin mist that disappears when the sun decides to shine. He was disconcerted, trying to find some phrase that would alleviate the weight that had fallen upon him, but nothing came. And it's curious how, in those moments, silence is more instructive than any moralistic discourse. He wasn't scolded, he wasn't humiliated, he wasn't exposed beyond what he himself had shown of himself. What hurt him was realizing the contrast between who he chose to be and who she chose to be, and that, for anyone with a minimum of conscience, is a wound that doesn't heal quickly. This shift was felt by everyone there. People weren't commenting aloud, but you could almost hear the collective thought. That's how you exercise authority. It was like witnessing the unfolding of a hidden truth that had always been there, but only reveals itself under tension when the other's character is tested without warning. And the woman, maintaining that impeccable posture, even had the kindness to look at the billionaire with empathy, not to alleviate his shame, but to show that she didn't see him as an enemy, but as someone who perhaps was having his first real confrontation with his own attitude. With the same calm she had from the beginning, she said, "We all show who we really are when we think we can boss someone around." It didn't sound like criticism. It sounded like reflection, and that difference changes everything. The manager then organized the line, the employees resumed work, but nothing returned completely to normal. It was as if that environment had undergone an invisible transformation, an adjustment in how each person perceived authority, respect, and behavior. Even the passengers who were just passing through felt the shift, that pleasant sensation of witnessing justice without violence, truth without shouting, elegance without ostentation. The woman picked up her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and simply waited her turn, as if she were just another ordinary person. And perhaps that was the most powerful message of all. She didn't need special treatment to prove she was important. Her importance manifested itself in how she treated everyone around her. Meanwhile, the billionaire walked away slowly, with heavy steps, like someone who needed to rethink many things. There was no more room for arrogance. He was dealing with the internal consequences of his own choices, facing the revelation that no one likes to confront, that power without conscience is just noise. And all that noise he had made before now seemed ridiculous, childish, totally disconnected from who he imagined himself to be. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that respect is not born from the fear you provoke, but from the posture you maintain when no one is applauding you. And here comes the most interesting part of this story, the kind of revelation that changes mindsets, that shakes up the personal journey of anyone who pays attention. Because what she did there wasn't just to maintain her composure while being attacked. It was to show through actions that there are silent decisions that have a much greater impact than any direct revenge. She could have asked that the billionaire be served last. She could have shown authority in a harsh way. She could have made his ego taste its own medicine. But she chose the opposite. She placed him before his own reflection without pushing him. And that's the kind of attitude that transforms environments, that inspires, that teaches more than 1,000 speeches about humility and respect. And as she waited patiently, the atmosphere calmed down. The tension dissolved, but the lesson remained. The people around her looked at her with a new kind of admiration, the kind that arises when someone demonstrates true greatness. And that's why moments like that stick in our memory, because they remind us that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply reveals itself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the way she handles what happens after that moment reveals an even more powerful principle about positioning, self-control, and the invisible strength of those who don't compromise their values. If this passage made sense to you, comment below. This makes sense to me. And if you've made it this far with me, it's because this story touched you in some way. And that says a lot about the kind of person you are. Before I finish, I just want to ask you something simple, but which makes a huge difference in keeping this kind of content alive. If this video gave you some reflection, a different perspective on respect, awareness, or transformation, please subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a technical gesture, it's the most direct way to show me that it's worthwhile to continue bringing conversations like this, conversations that truly resonate with us. And since you've made it this far, leave a comment with a phrase that only those who stayed until now will understand. Write, "I'm with you until the end." This type of message creates a real connection, and I always read everything with care. Oh, and of course, if this video has stayed with you well so far, give it a like before you leave. It's quick, but it really helps too. Spread this message to more people who might need to hear a truth told calmly, humanely, and in depth. And if you'd like to continue this journey with me, there's a video over here that complements this topic in a way you'll enjoy. Click and continue reading there.